from the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Welcome to OpenLine tonight, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Carrie Sharp. I am glad that you are with us. Tonight's topic, we are talking about amending the Tennessee Constitution. It will be something that you get to vote on come November 8th of this year. We're going to speak about a specific amendment. It'd be amendment number 3 when you go to vote. And I have Senator Raumesh Akbari here joining us tonight. Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Happy to talk.
Good. We have a lot to talk about with this amendment, but first of all, you've been working on this one for quite some time.
We have. So it takes a long time to get a constitutional amendment through. One, they want to make sure that it's not just one set of elected officials. They think it's a good idea and they push for it. So you have to pass it through 2 general assemblies, which potentially could take up to 4 years. Once it passes unanimously in the House and Senate, it goes to the governor. You have to bring it back again 2 years later, goes to the House and Senate, goes to the governor, and then finally, when there's a gubernatorial election, it finds its way to a statewide ballot.
And that is where we are this November.
Yes.
And there are actually going to be 4 amendments on that ballot, but tonight we're talking about amendment number 3, and I just want to pause, remind you, this is OpenLine. So if this sparks your interest, if you have questions about this amendment, which we're going to dive into, give us a call. 615-737+ is the number to call. Senator Akbari has been critical in pushing for this, in getting the language the way it needs to be. Yeah. So what is amendment number 3?
So amendment number 3 takes out the exception for slavery for those who are incarcerated. A lot of people say, well, what are you talking about? Slavery was outlawed, you know, after the Civil War with the 13th Amendment. Yes, that's the case, but all state legislatures across the country adopted the language that slavery is forever outlawed except for those who are incarcerated. And so that's what we're doing. We're closing that loophole so that those who are incarcerated cannot be forced into labor without receiving any sort of payment.
Is that a problem right now?
It's not, but the way I look at it is our Constitution reflects our conscience and our moral compass. And so we need to make sure that our beliefs and our moral standards are enshrined in our Constitution. And it's part of a movement across the country just to make sure that, you know, the language in our Constitution reflects how we feel as a state.
This has taken you a long time, but it's something near and dear to your heart. Has it been worth this process to this point?
I think so. I think that we've discovered through this process, you know, there are families who were broken apart immediately after the Civil War, leading into after Reconstruction, because they had family members that were being forced into basically back into slavery after Reconstruction. And so not only is it a way to honor their legacy, but also to reflect, like I said, our values and our morals as a state. So I think it's been worth it. It's certainly been a journey. The first General Assembly, it passed unanimously. The second General Assembly, it got a little dicey.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think it's been worth it, and I'm hoping that the voters will realize that and will support it and will vote for it in November.
And we'll get to those some of those dissenters here in a second, but I want to read the language because, as you well know, these constitutional amendments are usually just muddy.
Right.
You go to read them, and that was part of our problem this last election here in Davidson County. People were in line for hours because there were so many amendments to go through.
Yeah.
And they were just wordy and confusing.
Yeah.
This one, as I read it today, I was like, oh, well, that's pretty clear.
Right.
And that's pretty strange for these amendments, but I do want to read it. So this is going to just take me a second, but hang with me because I think this is very important. The summary says, the amendment would change the current language in Article 1, Section 33 of the Tennessee Constitution, which says that slavery and involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a person who has been duly convicted of crime, are forever prohibited in this state. The amendment would delete this current language and replace it with the following language, quote, slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited. Nothing in this section shall prohibit an inmate from working when the inmate has been duly convicted of a crime. Here's the question that voters will see. Shall Article 1, Section 33 of the Constitution of Tennessee be amended by deleting the section and substituting instead the following? Section 33, slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited. Nothing in this section shall prohibit an inmate from working when the inmate has been duly convicted of a crime.
Right. So it's pretty straightforward.
I think so.
Yeah. I remember 4 years ago when there was a constitutional amendment amendment, it was in all this legalese, and you're like, what is that really saying? But this is really easy. It's saying, you know, we will outlaw slavery and involuntary servitude in our Constitution. It will be reflected in there, even if you're incarcerated. But the Department of Corrections wanted us to add language that made it clear if you are incarcerated, you can work a job, or you can, you know, but you have to receive payment. And I think that was part of the discussion in the Senate this year. One of my colleagues tried to say, well, slavery doesn't exist in this state. And I said, I know. And they said, well, this really doesn't do anything. I said, yes, it does, because there's a difference between slavery and working. I have worked. I have never been a slave. And, you know, that's the key distinction that we want Tennesseans to see. You know, our values, we have long decided where we are on this issue. Let's make sure our Constitution reflects that.
And as you mentioned, the first time this was voted on, it was unanimous across both houses, right?
Yeah. And then you get the second time, and it's like, what's going on? What is this opposition? I think one of my colleagues said he didn't understand what the legislation was saying, and so he couldn't explain it to his constituents. But you see, it's actually pretty clear. So we'll see. And I know that a couple of the national morning show kind of ridiculed Tennessee for that opposition, but we moved past it. We're gonna change their minds when we vote in November.
Yeah. So Senator Brian Kelsey is quoted as saying, "I just think it's ultimately fake history to be telling our voters next year that the 1870 Constitution allowed slavery. It clearly did not, and it passed 5 years after Tennessee and the United States ratified the 13th Amendment, forever prohibiting slavery. So that, to me, Mr. Speaker, is fake history, and for that reason, I actually will be voting no."
Exactly, and I just said, look, 2 years ago you voted for it, and we're not saying that the 1870 ratification of that amendment did not ban slavery outright. It did, but it did allow for an exception, and that is all we're trying to do with this amendment. I think you kind of get a little bit sensationalized and kind of start talking to, you know, a soundbite as opposed to the actual issue, because again, Senator Kelsey voted for it 2 years ago.
Yeah. So this is clearly just saying slavery, not in Tennessee.
Not in Tennessee.
Not in Tennessee. Now, when a lot of people, you know, you get into that gray area when you bring up criminals, people in prison, in jail, and you're like, they gotta do the time, you know, and rightly so.
Yeah.
So, as you said, the Department of Corrections was adamant about adding some language in there because, as we all know, people do jobs in prison, but they don't get paid even minimum wage. Is that an issue at all here?
So we're still researching that. I don't think that it is. Obviously, we would like those who are incarcerated, who are doing a full day's work, to be able to earn money, to pay back their fines and fees, to support their family. Right now, they're earning, I think, like you said, not even minimum wage. But the key is there cannot be a situation where corrections could force them to work and not pay them, and that is what this amendment will take care of.
So it can be said that there's no slavery, there's no enforced, you know, work without pay here in Tennessee. I also think it's important to point out that these amendments don't pass just by a majority vote. It is a little bit complicated, the system, and again, I think to ensure that maybe these things don't come up all the time, or we're constantly making changes. I don't know, what is the reasoning behind it?
They want it to be more difficult because that is our defining document, right? And if every time someone had an idea they could amend the Constitution, you know, our Constitution would probably be thousands of pages long and have all sorts of nonsense.
And nobody would know what was in it. Yes.
All sorts of nonsense. So by making it have to pass through two general assemblies, potentially two different sets of elected officials, the governor has to approve it both times, and then the majority of folks who vote for the governor in the governor's race.
For all candidates, right?
But they at least have to vote in the gubernatorial.
Yes.
And then that percentage will equate to how many is needed for yes or no on the amendment.
Yeah. So I highlighted this one too because I mean it gets into the the fine hairs of this. It says to determine the number of votes needed to adapt a proposed constitutional amendment, votes for all candidates for governor are added together and then divided by 2. If there are more yes votes than no votes on the proposed amendment and the number of yes votes exceeds 50% plus 1 of the total votes for governor, the amendment passes and becomes part of the Constitution.
So that's the key. If you want your vote for the amendment to count, you also have to vote for at least one candidate for governor. You cannot skip that office.
Yeah, got to do that. Oh, and that's why this has to be in the year of a governor's race.
That's right. Yeah.
It's all coming together, right?
There's a system to it.
There is a system to it. So if people vote yes to that. They're saying we want to change this language in the Constitution.
Right. That's what we want them to do. Vote yes. Yes on 3. That's it.
You know, that is, and we've done a story on this on the news side of our operation, is some in the African American community, ministers are bringing this up in the pulpit right now and making it very clear to their congregations what this is, what it is not, and asking them to vote yes.
Yeah. So I'm planning on working with some ministers down in Memphis. I did this around getting people to go out to vote, right? Reminding your congregation, it doesn't matter who you vote for, but you need to vote. We're going to do the same thing around this, but we're actually going to explain to them this is what this means, and you should vote yes for it. And I think that's because a lot of people, especially those in the voting population, 55 plus, 70 plus, are going to church every Sunday. If they're not going to church, they're watching online, which I love, Bedside Baptist. And so they're learning and they're hearing these things that they might not have heard of. And so it's just one more touch point for them.
We're going to dig into that in just a little bit, but I first have to take a commercial break. So we will do that and come right back. And again, we encourage your calls tonight, 615-737+.